So let's all please welcome Tom McCarthy.
Thanks, guys, for having me today. This is usually for most baseball broadcasters, they're off season. For me, I've kind of built my sort of career on not having much of an off season, just from a baseball standpoint, carrying over to football and basketball. That's generally been the case for me since I was in college, because I used to cover all these different sports when I was a sports writer and eventually a broadcaster. So I went to Trenton State College. I graduated in 1990. It was called Trenton State College at the time. I was actually a biology major, which I know sounds kind of strange, but when I was going to schools, I had applied to about 7 different schools, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was play baseball. So I basically had a different major at each school I went to. For Rutgers, I was a business major. For Indiana, which is the only school that offered me a partial scholarship, I was a journalism major. For TCNJ, I was a biology major. For North Carolina Wesleyan, I was hotel and restaurant management. I have no idea why, but I was told that was their big major, so that's what I signed up for. And then it wasn't until I went to Trenton State College that I realized that I wasn't going to do anything in biology, but I had signed up for it, so I had to stay with it. And I actually stayed with it for about 2.5 years before I eventually switched over to communications. And I tell people all the time that whatever you do when you go to college, it really doesn't matter from a major standpoint, but take other classes in broadcasting or journalism or media, just to kind of get a little taste of what the life is like as a broadcaster, as a journalist. I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I would go to school. My plan was I was going to play baseball and I was going to get drafted, and that was it, and I wasn't going to look back, and I wasn't going to have to worry about having a job. I'd wear sneakers for my entire life. But my thought was, if I was going to be at Trenton State College, I would try to be a doctor. It took me probably 1 semester of a GPA of 2.08 my first year, realizing that I was not going to be a doctor. I got cut from the baseball team that fall as well, so I was kind of a nomad at that point, not really knowing what I was going to do. I was going to transfer. I decided not to, and decided that if I was going to do anything, it was going to have to be somewhere in the world of sports. So I immediately started writing for the Trenton Times, and that to me was my first step into this industry. And for me, it opened up so many doors. You'll find as we go through this that I've done just about everything. I've been a broadcaster. I've been a writer. I have gone back to school to be a teacher. I have been an administrator in the sports world. I've done it all. And all of it sort of is intertwined and led me to where I am today. Because I tried something, didn't like it, tried something else, didn't like it, tried this, and said, okay, I like that part of it. And for all of you, I think that's what is the best thing about where you are right now, is that you are at a point where you can try anything and figure out what your life's work and what your life's goal will be without having any ramifications at this point in your life. So I stayed as a biology major until the middle of my junior year, and one of my biology professors, who was my advisor, brought me in one day and asked me what I was going to do. And I said, well, I'm going to graduate, and I'm working at the Trenton Times, so I'm going to keep on writing for the Trenton Times. And he said, well, what are you going to do with this biology degree? And I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this biology degree. So he's the one that talked me into transferring into the communications department, which was the best thing I ever did. I immediately took a radio class, and in that radio class, I had a teacher who said, man, you have a good voice. You should really think about doing this for a living. Well, that's all I needed to hear, because from there I started broadcasting the football games at Trenton State College for the paid station, not the school station, but the paid station. So I was kind of doing both. I was writing and I was broadcasting. And I sort of got bit by that bug about being behind the microphone. I mean, there's this natural high of being behind a microphone that I cannot explain. I don't get it any other place. It's incredible to have a microphone in front of you and to have a sporting event or any kind of event that you can broadcast. I eventually graduated from TCNJ in 4 years, stayed at the Trenton Times once I got out of school, but still did a lot of local broadcasting. I broadcast high school games. I broadcast some of the Rider basketball games on the local station. I was doing TCNJ football. And then eventually, I wanted to try to become a baseball play-by-play broadcaster. I've been doing some high school games. So I I was writing stories each week for the Trenton Times about local minor league players from the area. And there was one minor league player who was down in Charleston, South Carolina, by the name of Dave Leback, who went to Northern Burlington High School. He was a really good player, drafted by the San Diego Padres. Well, I was about to get married, so I went down to South Carolina to meet the other part of my wife's family. And he was playing for the team down there, the Charleston Rainbows. So out of nowhere, I called the broadcaster that was doing those games. And I said, hey, I'm coming down to write a story on Dave Leback. Can I sit in to see how you broadcast a professional baseball game? He said, yeah. He goes, if you want, you can come on the air with me too. He goes, I'm always looking for an extra partner. So I went down. He let me sit in for 2 games as a color commentator. And then the 3rd day, he let me do play-by-play. And then the 4th day, he let me do the whole game play-by-play. Now, I don't know about all of you, but if somebody called me right now and said, hey, I'd like to become a broadcaster, can I sit in and do a game with you? I would say, there's no chance anybody's going to let you sit in and do a game. But he did. And I subsequently went down again later on in the year and did 7 more games. And I used that tape to get the Thunder job. So when the Thunder came here, I don't know if you guys have ever been to a Thunder game, but when the Thunder came here in 1994, I was the first employee that was hired. And I wound up broadcasting the games, and also I was the director of public and media relations, and I was in charge of the community relations program. So for me, that was the first step in becoming, I thought, a professional broadcaster, was doing those games. And also getting a chance to understand the world of PR, the world of media. I was a writer for 5 years with the Trenton Times. I got to cover high school games, college games, the Phillies in '93 when they went to the World Series, the Yankees in '93 when they started to come back up as a better team. But now I was transitioning into being a broadcaster on a full-time basis, but also a director of public relations, media relations, and community relations, which all sort of comes together in one world, as you guys, I'm sure, are seeing not only on social media, but also in the world of sports. Everything sort of ties into the other. You know, the PR directors and the broadcasters work closely in making sure, from a PR standpoint, that the team's message is sent out clearly to the broadcasters, whether it's in notes, whether it's in phone conversations, whether it's in just meetings with the players. And for 7 years, I did that. And I did it, for the Thunder, and eventually became the vice president of the Trenton Thunder. And then in 1999, I was offered another position in minor league baseball to run my own team. But it would have meant that I would have had to give up all the broadcasting that I had done. At that point, I was doing Princeton football, I was doing the Thunder games, I was doing a local talk show each week on a local radio station. Plus, I was the assistant general manager of the team and overseeing about 400 employees at the same time. So I was offered the job to be the general manager of a team down in Lakewood, New Jersey called the Lakewood Blue Claws. And I accepted it. And I did it for my family more than anything else. At that point, I had 3 of my 4 kids, and I thought, all right, this is pretty stable. I don't have to worry about, fighting for the next job. I can take this job for the rest of my life. The last minute, I decided not to take it. I decided that I couldn't give up the broadcasting. I could not give up, the chance of being a major league broadcaster or an NFL broadcaster or a big-time college football or basketball broadcaster. And I decided not to take it. And I decided to not go back to the Thunder as their assistant general manager. And I resigned. And still stayed 1 more year to do their games. And did a talk show here locally, a sports talk show, from 3 until 7 every single day. And with that, it sort of led me to being able to do some other things on ESPN radio. I was able to build a studio in my basement where I was able to do national radio shows from that studio. So at the time, I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. I thought I maybe made a bad decision. I was 30 years old at that point, and I had given up a job that probably paid at the time to run a baseball team about $130,000 a year, base salary basically, to then go back down a few rungs to do minor league baseball games on the radio, but also host my own radio show. As it turns out, it was the right decision, but back then I had no idea whether it was the right decision. I kind of followed my gut, and relied on some of the people that I was closest to see if this was the right thing to do. What followed was a year later I was hired by the Phillies in 2001, and from there things really started to take off. Whether it be broadcasting Major League Baseball games or starting to eventually do big-time college football and then eventually the NFL. But all of the things that I did when I was younger, the newspaper reporting, the public relations part of it, the education that was outside of the world of communications, all led me to where I am today. And I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky to have the people around me that have been supportive, that have allowed me to do all these different things. My biggest thing that I tell kids all the time, I tell my own kids this, is don't sell yourself short when it comes to opportunities. If somebody in the PR world offers you a chance to do PR work, take it, with the thought in mind that, okay, I want to be a broadcaster or a writer, because that will eventually lead you to where you want to go. If somebody in the broadcasting world offers you a high school game, take it. Get the reps behind the microphone to be able to talk and to be able to get used to doing games. If somebody offers you a community relations opportunity at a younger age, take it, because it will eventually lead you to where you want to go, which is either in PR, it's either in journalism, or it's either in broadcasting. The more interaction you have with people, the more you have the ability to step up and get in front of people and speak to them on a daily basis without even thinking and blinking an eye, the better you will become with whatever it is that you want to do as you get older. I look back to the things that really helped me when I was, let's say, your age. Speech classes were huge, because I can get in front of a room of 35 or 3,500, and I don't blink an eye as far as what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it. Those speech classes to me really helped me. Being the director of PR and media for the Trenton Thunder helps me understand the proper way to present a story from a team standpoint. That's been huge in my maturation as a broadcaster and even as a person. When I was at the Thunder, I used to have to sell advertising. My quota each year was to sell between $500,000 and $750,000 in advertising each year. I hated it, but that was my quota. So the fact that I did that for 7 years gives me a better understanding as a broadcaster for the Phillies how important it is to point out which advertiser is here, which advertiser is there when putting the message out on television. So all of those things kind of feed into one another. Now, I'm still the kind of guy that does a lot of different things, and I do believe that it makes me better at all of them. The baseball season's long. I'm on the road for baseball over 100 days a year, counting spring training, because I have to be down there for the entire month of March and before the season begins. But doing baseball helps me do football, and that helps me do basketball, the pacing of a broadcast, all of those different things. There may be a time where I kind of back off a little bit as I get a little bit older, but I feel like right now the opportunities are there for me to keep getting better in what I do. I don't think that there's ever an opportunity where you cannot get better as a person and as a broadcaster. So the more games I do, the better I kind of feel. I feel like I will become as the days move on. You guys are coming out of college or in college, I think, at the best time to be a broadcaster. It may not necessarily be the best time all the time to be a writer or a journalist, but to be a broadcaster combined with being a journalist, it's the best time in the world. The biggest reason why is because of social media. When I began my broadcasting career, I was editing tape with a razor blade. I was editing interviews with a razor blade. Now I can pop it into a computer and in a matter of seconds have an interview edited down from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. But it also can be posted immediately on the internet, whereas when I did it, it had to be broadcast over the air, and I still have boxes upon boxes. I have enough boxes of tapes to fill probably the whole back wall of cabinets that are in my office at home. Nowadays, I can pull all those on a little hard drive. I think, and I tell my boys this because both of them are in college to be broadcasters, this is the best time to be a broadcaster. to be a broadcaster and a journalist on the internet, because there's so many opportunities that are out there. Digitally, there's so many opportunities that are out there, and it's just going to grow exponentially. 10 years ago, I would not have told you that. 10 years ago, I would have told you that newspapers to a certain extent are dying, that radio to a certain extent is dying, except for the broadcast of games. Now, I think, with the influx of satellite radio, with the influx of the internet and newspapers and magazines on the internet, there are jobs out there for all of you if you're interested in doing it. So I'm excited for you. I'm excited for my family, for my boys. I'm excited that they're going to have an opportunity that maybe a generation 15 years ago did not have. And it's up to all of you to sort of take advantage of that as much as possible. With that, though, comes more and more responsibility, because what you say, what you put on the internet, you obviously all know this, is out there forever. So it comes with great responsibility to be able to have all those resources. But it also comes with responsibility for all of you to understand what you need and what you don't need to have out there on a daily basis. From our standpoint, we have watched technology sort of grow over the last 5 years, from the amount of graphics that we have on television, from the amount of camera opportunities that we have and the new cameras that are coming in. I've tried to keep up with, I never feel like I'm at all old. I mean, I'm 47 years old, but I find over the last 3 or 4 years, I have had to work my tail off to try to understand this next generation of graphics and statistics that are coming out in the world of sports that you probably understand in a blink of an eye. That to me is exciting, that there's so much that's coming up and there's so much that's out there for all of us to consume as a broadcaster, as a fan, and just people who love sports. So for all of you, I think that the sky's the limit about what you're able to do and what you're able to specialize in. But broadening your horizons as this moves on is of the utmost importance. I'll open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Tom, if I could start with the first question. You were talking about social media, and it's a good segue. What we did last class was we analyzed the Sixers' social media.
Yeah.
And the whole idea, the team isn't doing well, what do they do on social media? So the past couple of years with the Phillies, you're an announcer, but you're also doing a PR type of job as the announcer. How do you put good when things always aren't good, if it's on the air or if it is in social media?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm on Twitter right now. For some reason, I have not been verified on Twitter, even though I'm on it. People ask me all the time, why don't you get verified? I'm like, well, I have no idea how to get verified. That's the first thing. It's really not that important to me, but I've kind of grown over the last couple of weeks to realize, after doing a lot of these NFL games on CBS, that it is important for me to be verified, because in this day and age, people want to reach out and talk to you, and the information that's out there, whether it be from other writers, other broadcasters, is important to garner. So for me, there is a growing sense of needing to use social media even more over the next several years, because it is exploding more and more. From a team standpoint, we used to be able to open the gates and we would be sold out every single night. That's because our product on the field was so good, and will be again. But nowadays, with the way the social media is and the way the Phillies are utilizing it, there's a lot of contests that are being utilized to give out tickets. There's a lot of promotion of charitable events that are happening in the Philadelphia area that we do. That's important to get out there. We have 3 people designated in the Phillies organization that are in charge basically of just social media. That's their job. And 5 years ago, we didn't have that. We didn't have one person that did it. 3 years ago, we had one person. Now we have 3 people that do it. And that's their job, basically, is to oversee the social media aspect of the Philadelphia Phillies. As we've played poorly these last 2 years, their responsibility is, as we mentioned, to make sure that all the charitable things that the organization has done are out there, that the events that are happening leading up to the game are out there, but also what's happening in our farm system that'll give people optimism for the future. That's what is being promoted on social media as well. We still obviously promote the players that we have. That's always important to utilize. But I do think that if there's a message to get out there, In this day and age, press releases are still extremely important, but those press releases go out to the media sites, but they also go right onto the team's Instagram site, the team's Twitter account, on their Facebook page, and everything else that they utilize. They try to sell the ballpark. They try to sell the experience of going to a baseball game. You do that through pictures, you do that through video, and social media is the fastest way for them to get that point out there.
And one of the things the student says, here are the millennials,
Yeah.
the digital natives who have grown up with social media. They look and they see what they want, what they think creates a good, engaging relationship. And we were talking about humor and feedback, that two-way communication. So someone like yourself, as you said, you came of age before social media. Do you take it upon yourself to learn it? Do you look at what other people are doing? How do you create your own social media brand for all the different projects?
It's a good question. I'm very conservative when it comes to social media. I am. I don't have Facebook. I do not have an Instagram account. I have a Twitter account. There are several parodies to me that are out on Twitter that my kids find very entertaining and their friends find very entertaining, and they actually respond to all the time. But I know that as I move forward, I have a broadcast partner who is younger than I am, who's a little bit more active on the internet than I am, but does not have a Twitter page and will not do it. He just feels like it's something he doesn't want to do and will not do. That's fine. I think we're all different when it comes to that. I think that as we grow more, there'll probably be other things that are going to pop up on social media. There's 140 characters that you have. It's hard to be funny in 140 characters. It is. It's hard to be funny in any walk of life. It's easy to be a smartass on social media. It really is. And that's something that we as people in the industry have to get used to. I mean, I have instant feedback from fans. Instant. I mean, before the phrase comes out of my mouth, there's instant feedback. For me, who has a very thick skin, a very tough skin, I'm not fazed by it at all. But I know that there's younger people in my industry that are fazed by it, and they fight back. And it's the worst thing to do is fight back. I'll either retweet what somebody writes about me, about my bald head, about my, I don't know, the shirt that I'm wearing that night or whatever. But I will very rarely respond back to them with a comment that is out there forever. I'll respond back, but it won't be in anything that will be confrontational at all. There are other people that are different. The thing about social media is that a lot of times you don't know who it is that's sending it to you. You have to rely on a thick skin and just go with have the good and the bad. I did the Eagles game the other day on radio, and it was amazing the response, how positive it was. And there were one or two responses that weren't positive. You kind of have to just shake it off at this point. And from a Phillies standpoint, they know that when they send out pictures about what's going on at the ballpark, there will be instant criticism about the way the team is playing. It's all part of it. But their message is out there, and they're controlling the message that they're putting out there.
Other questions?
You started as a writer first, correct?
I did.
So what was the transition like going from writing to broadcasting?
Well, I said back then, and I really believe this, that one of the great things about being a writer is that I was interviewing athletes or coaches all the time. So when I then had to sit down and do an interview with them on the radio or on television, I wasn't fazed by it. I basically I did the interview the same exact way. So for me, that helped. And if you are going to be on TV or going to be in radio or going to be in PR, you have to be able to write. The written sentence is a lost art to a certain extent, I think. I fight with this all the time with my two oldest boys because everything is THX for thanks, everything is a symbol. The fact that I was a writer before I was a broadcaster definitely helped me become a broadcaster, because I've always said that one no doubt helps the other. And I became better with people. I became better as an interviewer. I became better as a speaker just because I was a writer before anything else. And honestly, when I was in college, I don't know how you guys are with this, but my grammar was terrible. Terrible. I'm not sure why. I was always a great student. I was always a good student with the English language, but for some reason, My written word was very weak, and by writing, that helped me not only become a better writer, of course, but also become a better speaker and a better broadcaster. You know, because I talk for 3 hours live all the time. Sometimes I have no idea what's coming out of my mouth. I really don't. I mean, sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes I take a step back after I said it and said, that made no sense. And you try to fix it if you can, but it's live TV or live radio. So, to me, writing is the most important thing that you, as young people, have to do.
What's it like to announce a rivalry game?
It's incredible. I was actually on the phone with somebody today. 2 years ago, I did the Kentucky-Florida game on a basketball game on CBS, and it was one of the biggest basketball games I had done up till that point on television. And you kind of, in fact, I'm doing Louisville, Kentucky on the 26th of December. So I started my preparation last night for that because Kentucky was on against Duke. And the rivalry part of it is what I was researching, just how deep-seated that hatred is between the two schools and the people that go to those schools. So you just try to tell the story. But I'll tell you, you get caught up in the atmosphere and the excitement of it. I mean, it's incredible to be part of something like that. You know, I've done rivalries as small as Penn and Princeton, which isn't really that small, or wasn't back when I was doing them. But this one, you know, doing this one, the Louisville, Kentucky game, is, you know, that's going to be a big one, and I'm excited to be able to do that.
So you're speaking on like doing your preparation for that over a month in advance.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, being a play-by-play guy or a color commentator, how much research, like what's your homework like on a daily basis? And like how different is it from college when you're doing smaller broadcasts to now doing professional?
It's harder when you're doing a smaller broadcast because there wasn't much at your disposal. So you really had to research and even talk to a lot of the players beforehand if you could. Sometimes you went in with just numbers and the game was sort of your story more than anything else. Now, last night I spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours just putting notes together for the Louisville, Kentucky game. Today I'll sit down and start my book for next Thursday's Cowboy-Panther game on Thanksgiving Day. Normally my preparation for football, I'm usually doing one game a week, will begin the Monday before the game. That's when I'll put my entire chart together. Most guys or gals have charts now which are all computerized, and I have those. But I have found that writing it out, writing all the names of the players out, the numbers, all that stuff, is how I remember it easier. You know, I have a computer program that I just type in the name of the team, and that's it. And the computer program somehow through Excel puts everything in, names, numbers, all these things, stats. But for me to write it out, that's how I recall it a little bit easier. So my preparation for football will usually begin the Monday before the game. My preparation for baseball, it sort of feeds one game into another. So I'll prepare in the morning before I go to the ballpark. For about 2 hours, I'll write notes about the different teams, the teams that are in there, and the pitchers that are throwing that night. But the game sort of dictates, you know, a lot of the story there. And for college basketball, I'll usually start preparing 2 days before the game that I have. And the internet is, God bless the internet. I mean, I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. When I was at the Thunder, I was in charge of putting our network together for the computer, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I put this network together not knowing what the internet was at the time. And I remember having to convince our general manager to get an email address. He's like, well, what do I need this for? I said, well, eventually, I said, people will try to contact you, from what I understand, through email. And he goes, nobody's going to try to contact me through this. I'm going to get a phone call or a letter. And I'm saying, I don't know. I said, I just read a story saying that people will eventually try to find it. I mean, this is only 20 years. I mean, well, that's 20 years, I guess. But it's not that long ago. It doesn't seem like that long ago. But the internet there's so many stories on the internet. And I read as much as I can. I really do. I read as much as I can, just to kind of have a basis for what those stories are. You know.
So like if you're announcing a Phillies game, for example, and you know, obviously they haven't had too many good seasons as of late, how negative are you allowed to be about the team? Like, do you have to kind of tone it to more of a positive tone, or can you actually criticize?
You can criticize. You know, there's two different ends of it. I left the Phillies in 06 and 07 and went to the Mets and broadcast their games on radio. And I was an employee of WFAN, whereas with the Phillies, I'm an employee of the Phillies. So with WFAN, I had carte blanche, basically. If they played poorly, I said they played poorly. In '07, at the end of the year, the Mets played very poorly. So we were pretty honest about that. With the Phillies, they sort of give me latitude, but I kind of understand where the line is. I'm not going to spend 2.5 hours bashing the team, because in reality, I don't think anybody wants to watch a game like that. They want to watch a game in peace almost. And I kind of think that you, Coach Davis, you guys have your own opinions. So you'll garner your own opinions, not based on what I say, I think, but based on what you see. But we have latitude. We do. We have latitude about it. Sometimes people, I'll get emails from people saying, "Oh, you're such a homer. You're this. You're that." You do 162 games, baseball games, or 175 games in our case, because of spring training. You're going to be a homer because you want that team to do well. Because there's nothing better than postseason baseball. I mean, you think about the Mets fans or even the Yankee fans who are in the postseason this year. There's nothing better than that. And so that's what you're striving for, is to get into the postseason. So are you a homer? You're going to be labeled that way because you're associated with the team. You can't let that sort of skew how you handle the game. But we have a lot of latitude. It's been bad these last couple of years. I mean, I actually felt bad in July for Dominic Brown, because I felt like every night it was kind of a bashing of Dominic Brown because he did something wrong almost every night. But you can't sugarcoat it. It's there. Particularly on TV, they're seeing it. So you can't lie about the way things are. You have to use common sense. It's like anything else. I've been called into the office for things that I didn't think were that big of a deal. It's okay. It's their opinion. But then I've said things, I'm like, oh man, maybe we crossed the line with that. Nobody ever said anything. So I think it depends on how you hit that person that day also.
When broadcasting a game, how do you manage the ratio of actually doing play-by-play and
Yeah.
talking about a general topic? I remember I used to watch Harry Cowles, what I loved was the stories he had, and watching you, I love listening to you display games.
It's a good question, and thank you for that. When I came back from the Mets to the Phillies, I was a radio guy who had done TV. I did basketball on TV, I had done some football on TV, but I hadn't done baseball really on TV. I did like 1 or 2 games a year with the Thunder. So the transition from radio to TV is difficult because on radio you're constantly talking. So, because you're telling the story, you're going to sort of paint the picture. On TV, the picture's there. And I know for the first 2 years, I talked way too much. And that was a criticism that I heard from a lot of people. And I understood that. And I was trying to get more and more comfortable with it. It's hard sometimes because I can always sense, I watch a lot of my games back, and I think that's important, is to the next day to watch, to see how your pace is, to see how your descriptions are of particular things. And I think that you have a sense after doing it for a while, okay, this is getting a little too long-winded. We do games each weekend at home with Mike Schmidt, and Mike is not a broadcaster, but he's the greatest player the Phillies have ever had. We kind of just let him go. But there are times where we'll miss a whole at-bat, but he's telling a story about something that he's opinionated about. I wouldn't do that, but for him, he's Mike Schmidt. You want to hear what he has to say. I think that there are times where I can gauge, okay, I'm getting a little too long-winded with this. I got to back off. And if I feel like I've talked too much in a game, I'll let like 3 or 4 pitches go by before I say anything else. But stories are the heart and soul of being a broadcaster. To me, the most important thing you can do is to have too much information going into a broadcast and not use it. I mean, that's the most important thing to do. Is, like I was researching last night for my basketball game in December. I may not use 3/4 of that stuff, but I'm ready. I'm ready if something happens, I can tell a story about it. But I think you kind of get a feel for it as you go forward. My son broadcast college games, and I was listening to him do a field hockey game the other day. It's not easy to do a field hockey game. And at one point, I actually thought he was talking way too much about a particular play. But then he backed off a little bit, and I can sense that he's getting sort of a feel for it right now. And I think that's what it is, you get a feel for it as it goes on.
So I really have a question. What's the most difficult thing you've had to announce? Guys that called you out on pushing their names?
That's a good question. I have, okay, so we have the Phillies now have a lot of Spanish players, and I try to get those Spanish names right. So Freddie Galvis is our shortstop, and it's pronounced, from what I understand, and I could be way wrong, is Galvis. That's how you're supposed to pronounce his name. So when he came back up to the big leagues a couple years ago, he wanted it to be Galvis. I have no problem with that. So I started calling him Galvis on the air. The next day, I got a message from the clubhouse saying that Freddie wanted to see me. So I went down, and he said, "You're pronouncing my name wrong." I said, "Okay, well, how do I pronounce it?" He said, "It's Galvis." I said, "Oh, okay, I thought you wanted it to be Galvis." And he said, "No, I thought about it, I want it to be Galvis." I was like, okay. So I started calling him Galvis. So 2 days later, our current manager was our bench coach, Pete McCann. Pete coached in winter ball in Dominican and Venezuela. And he said, "Tom, you're pronouncing Freddie's name." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're pronouncing it wrong." I said, "Well, it's supposed to be Galvis, right?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You're saying Galvis." I said, "Well, I know. He told me he wanted Galvis, but then he wanted to switch back to Galvis." And he goes, so he calls Freddie over. Freddie, "How do you want your name pronounced?" He goes, "Galvis." And I looked at him, I said, "We just had this conversation 2 days ago." Went back on the air, started calling him Galvis again. After the game, I got called into our general manager's office, and our owner was there. And he said, "Will you please stop butchering Freddie Galvis's name?" And I told him the story. He goes, "It's Galvis." So I said, "All right, that's fine. Are you sure?" They brought Freddie in. They said, "Freddie, how do you want your name to be pronounced?" He goes, "I want it to be pronounced Galvis." And I looked at him again. I said, "Is this a joke?" So yes, I mean, we do get called out from time to time. When I was in New York, large Spanish population listening to the games, obviously, and Carlos Beltran. It's really supposed to be pronounced Beltran. Like there's an emphasis on the last syllable. Well, I would get letters upon letters because I would say Beltran. Because it's really hard to say Carlos Beltran is going back on a fly ball. Beltran to the wall. Beltran, looks up. I mean, it's just hard to say that. But yeah, we would get called out on it. You try to be as exact as possible. Michael Franco, it's supposed to be Franco. He wants Franco. Our radio guy is calling him Franco because that's the way you're supposed to call it. I'm calling him Franco because that's the way he wants to be called it. You try to be as clear as you possibly can. So the hardest name that I've ever had to pronounce, the Patriots had a tight end who's now playing for the Saints called Ho'o Manawanui. That's his name. So for a week leading, and he had caught a couple touchdown passes, so I knew he was going to get a ball one week. So what I did is I found something on the internet, this is how crazy the internet is, where he is telling people how to pronounce his name. So I downloaded it, I recorded it, and put it on my phone as my ringtone. So for the week leading up to the Patriots game, my ringtone was, "Are you ready? Are you listening? Ho'o Manawanui." You got it? Ho'o Manawanui. So that was my ringtone. So that's how I learned how to say his name. But that's the toughest one because I didn't call him Ho'o Manawanui the one time. It didn't come out that way. It was like a mumble. It was like, so, yeah.
Who's your favorite player growing up, and who do you like now?
My favorite player growing up, I grew up a Mets fan. So I had a variety of poor players to choose from for a long time because they were really bad. I was a Tom Seaver fan when I grew up early on. And then he was traded. So the guy he was traded for was Steve Henderson, who was the hitting coach for the Phillies. So he was my favorite player for a couple of years. Then it was Keith Hernandez. So I've worked with all three of them. So Tom Seaver when I was at the Mets, Hernandez when I was at the Mets. So Hernandez would introduce me to people. He'd say, "Hey, this is Tom McCarthy, he does our radio." I was his favorite player when he was growing up, and he'd walk away. So, but Hernandez was my favorite player when I was growing up. My favorite athletes that I've had to cover are Chris Young, who's currently the pitcher for the Royals, 6'10" guy, who played at Princeton. He's a basketball player. He was an unbelievable basketball player. He's one of my favorite people of all time. David Eckstein, and now Jeff Francoeur. Jeff Francoeur could be the best person I'd ever met, but you really got to focus on what he's saying because he's all over the place sometimes if he doesn't take his ADD medicine. So, but he's so entertaining to listen to. He's one of the nicest people in the world.
Favorite stadium?
AT&T Park in San Francisco is my favorite baseball stadium. It is just, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the Giants fans as a whole. They're tough to be around, but it's an incredible place. I mean, it's just, That's my favorite new one. I still love the old ones, Wrigley and Fenway. Football stadium, my favorite one is Seattle. I mean, it's phenomenal. It shakes during games. It's so loud. I love Lambeau Field. But I would think that AT&T Park and Quest Field, I think that's what it's called now in Seattle, are my two favorite to go to.
Who's the person that you shared the booth with that was like a holy crap moment for you? Like, I never thought this would happen.
Boy, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think when I did my first major league game, my first play-by-play game, I called a home run for Scott Rowland at the Vet, and I looked over and Harry Callis was sitting there going like that. I mean, that was like, oh wow, I've made it. You know, this is pretty cool. I'm here. I've been really lucky. I've had some great partners over the years. I mean, I did football for 2 years with Rod Woodson. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. I'm looking over, I'm like, Rod Woodson's sitting here. I mean, I went out to dinner with him, all this kind of stuff. Doing different events with Tom Seaver was unbelievable because, I mean, he was my favorite player growing up ultimately. But I think that was when I really thought, wow, I mean, this is pretty cool. I've made it. And I did a game, I mean, as strange as this sounds, I mean, people don't always like him, but I did a Fox game, 2 Fox games with Tim McCarver, and I actually thought that was kind of neat to do 2 Fox games with, I mean, a Hall of Fame analyst, arguably the best analyst that, the game has had in the last 20 years. So, you got a question?
What's it like taking the long road trips with the team?
They're hard sometimes. I grew up, I mean, my kids grew up, both my boys play baseball. So they had a lot of success playing baseball. So I missed a lot of their games. So, that was the hardest part about being on the road. Now, being on the road with a major league team is not hard from a travel standpoint. And we have a charter. We basically get a bus driven right up to the stairs of the charter. There's as much food, and I like food. There's as much food as you want on that charter. We stay in really nice hotels. So that's not the hardest part. Really the hardest part about being on a long road trip is just being away from my family for as long as I'm away. Because this year, we actually had 5 10-game road trips. That's a lot. Of the 81 games we had on the road, I mean, 4 of the 81 games on the road, half of them were on 4 different trips. So that was a long time. One of them was 12 days, the other one was 11. I was in London this past October and November for the NFL for 12 days. That was hard right after the season ended, but it was kind of cool to be in London. So, yes, that's the hardest part, is just being away from my family.
What's the biggest difference between doing a Phillies game on Comcast Sportsnet and then covering them on Fox?
You have to be, that's a great question. So on Comcast Sportsnet, my stories are mostly about the Phillies. Because it's the Phillies home broadcast. I have stories about the teams that we're facing, but I'm not overwhelming the audience with those stories. On Fox, I am right down the middle. So I did a game on Fox 2 years ago against the Giants at Citizens Bank Park. And in that game, Cole Hamels hit a home run, and Matt Cain hit a home run. Matt Cain pitched for the Giants. So I'm doing the game with, I think, Mitch Williams at the time. And Cole Hamels hit a home run that had to be 400 feet. I mean, it was a no-doubter right off the bat. And I hit it. I nailed it. I was loud. I was into it. Matt Cain then came up and hit a home run that was a I mean, Citizens Bank Park, it's not deep in the outfield. So there's fly balls that just go out there. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that went out. Well, Matt Cain's ball was one of those where I didn't think it was going out. And, oh, I hear it from the Giants fans? I mean, instantly on Twitter, I was persona non grata with the Giants fans. They had a whole talk show on the Monday about how bad I was in San Francisco calling the game. I was so biased toward the Phillies based on that call. But objectively, you're trying to be as objective as possible. If I tell as many stories about the Giants as I did about the Phillies, then I feel like I've done my job. But sometimes you can't help it. The game is going to show you, like if it's a 10-1 game and one team wins over the other, they're going to get more stories, just the way it is. But you just try to prepare a little bit more for the other teams. And I like that part of this, to just try to be like right down the middle with it.
Do you ever get like messages from Phillies fans that are like upset thinking
Yes.
they're kind of like a traitor and all?
Yes. Well, one of the worst things I ever did, but I did it, is when I got the Mets job, somebody said, well, you grew up a Mets fan. And I said, yeah. And they said, isn't this like a dream job? I said, well, I guess so. I said, yeah, it's kind of a dream job. I said, but being in the big leagues as a whole is a dream job. That was my comment. Well, the quote in the paper was, yeah, this is a dream job, because I grew up a Mets fan. Well, I still have not heard the end of it from Phillies fans that I said that when I came back. But I did say it. But yeah, I get that all the time. I get that all the time. It's just, it's all in the ear of the beholder.
I'm not gonna lie, when you came over, I was kind of fishy. I was like, he's a Mets guy.
Yeah, you thought I was coming in and spying on the Phillies?
Well, no, it was just...
That's what a lot of people thought.
I was like, and I was pretty impressed with well.
I actually, it's funny because when I left, I thought I'd stay in New York forever. The Phillies organization is just an incredible place to work. But Harry's the one that called me and said, we need you to come back. Which was kind of cool, because the goal was I was coming back and eventually taking over for him when he retired, whenever that was, 5 years, 10 years down the road. Unfortunately, is that he passed away a year later, but he was really instrumental in me coming back. It was really a big deal for me to be the one that replaced him when he eventually retired, which that felt great. It really did. It felt great.
So you're the father of two boys who are getting into broadcasting now. So what's it like being your father? Are you a little more critical of their work?
I am, but I also send their work to other people to be critical. So I have a couple of my bosses, one my old boss at WFAN, and one of my bosses at Westwood One, who listen to my older son's broadcasts now and give him feedback. Because it's hard. I can listen to it, and they spotted for me and did stats for me when I was in London a few weeks ago, which was kind of neat. And they did a really good job. And I said to my boss from Westwood, I said, if you ever need them, they're available. They did a really nice job. He goes, yeah, you're just saying that because you're their dad. But I am critical. Because I want them to be really good at it. But I mostly send their stuff off to other people to listen to, because I know they'll listen to them more than they'll listen to me. They don't listen to me when I tell them to clean their room. So
who are some of the broadcasters you shaped your work around or emulated from who you listened to growing up? I love listening to John Miller and Bill Morgan on Sunday Night Baseball, or Dickie Leaper or basketball.
Yeah.
So who are some of those guys? And is there anybody that you can stand listening to? Me personally, Joe Buck and Chris Collinsworth.
See, I like Collinsworth. I do like him. I think he's got it. I think he's well informed. He's smart. But I do understand there's a lot of people that don't like him. When I was growing up, I listened a lot to the Phillies broadcasts. I listened to Bob Murphy from the Mets, who I thought was fantastic. I would listen to, as much as I can, or much as I could, Vin Scully, who is the master, I think, of all things baseball broadcasting-wise. Currently, though, I think the best out there is Dan Shulman from ESPN. I think his pace is good, his information is good. He's sharp. He does all sports. I think that's a huge key. So I listen to him a lot to try to find some tendencies with how he does games. I think he's really, really good. I think everybody's so different nowadays with the way they present it. I think the Fox broadcast sometimes it's too chatty. The postseason. There's too much going on where I kind of lose track of the game. But I tend to gravitate toward radio guys in a lot of ways. But I think Dan Shulman's the best right now. I really do. I just think he's really good. Basketball, he did that game last night, the Duke Kentucky game and the Kansas-Michigan State game. He was really good. Really good.
Tom, we talked in class what Joe was saying about Joe Buck. I personally don't understand it. Why is he such a lightning rod? Is it because he does big games, so therefore he's got a bigger spotlight on him?
Yeah.
And does he benefit from this vitriol that he gets thrown at?
Well, I think it's a good question. I don't think his bosses really look at it at all. Because to me, you could be 50-50 and not really you'll only hear the 50 that's bad, 50% bad. You very rarely will hear the 50% that's good. I have this conversation with people all the time, and I'm guilty of it. I'll get 10 really good responses from people, and then I'll get one that I have to make sure I respond to, whereas I forget about the 10 that are positive. when Joe first started, Joe's dad was such an eloquent and fantastic broadcaster. A lot of people felt like he got the job because of his dad. And I think that's followed him to a certain extent, that they feel like he's the chosen one. He hasn't really earned it. I think he earns it. I think he works hard. I just think that when you are broadcasting the Super Bowl, it's the largest audience in the world. If you have 50% of the people that aren't going to like you, that's still, 30 million people. That's a lot of people. So I just think I do think it's the age that we live in, where you're hearing more of it. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, when people watched the National Game of the Week when Sean McDonough did it, there was no internet, so you really didn't hear any response as to whether McDonough was good or not.
So if it was 20, 30 years ago, and you look at back how Pat Summerall was universally loved, Dick Evans was universally loved.
Yep.
If they were in the era of social media,
They'd still get criticism. Now, it may not be to the extent of Joe Buck, because he is a lightning rod to a certain extent for one reason or another. But I do think that you would probably hear more negative than they heard back then. I really do. Because Pat's games were different than what you're hearing now. Pat was more like Harry was, where there was a lot of, less was more. And then Madden came in, and Madden, blew up the screen because he was emphatic about everything. He was the first to use the telestrator. He used big, exciting words and things like that, whereas Summerall was sort of understated, but very good at what he did. So yeah, I do think that. I really do. I think from that standpoint, you have to have a thick skin. Because you can turn your attention about anything and everything, and people will criticize you about it. So I think it's just part of it.
Guys, we got about 10, 15 more minutes. Other questions?
Yeah.
If there's one game you wish, if somebody gave you a choice to broadcast one game in history, do you have a game you wish you could have broadcast?
Boy, that's a good question. Yeah, I think if I could have broadcast Game 6 of the '75 World Series between the Red Sox and the Reds, where Carlton Fisk hit the home run down the left field line, where you see him going like this, running down the line. One of those kind of games, I think, would have been huge because of the energy of Fenway Park, the electricity, all of that kind of stuff. So that kind of a game. I'll probably drive home and think about 5 or 6 others, but that's probably one. That's one that I think comes to mind, quickly. Just everything that was around it, that surrounded it. I mean, they wound up losing it, but still, that forced a Game 7. That game is what exploded television, baseball on television in the '70s, postseason baseball on television in the '70s. So that was pretty incredible.
What about the catch that Indy Chavez made in 2006?
Yeah. So I did that game. I was on radio, and funny story is that Gary Cohen, who was the Mets broadcaster, who is a very close friend and I grew up listening to a certain extent, I kind of sound a little bit like him on the air with our cadence and our pacing. So Gary was on TV that year. That's the only reason I got the radio jobs, because he moved to TV. So he wanted to do the postseason, and they were trying to figure out how can they get him involved. So I told them, I said, give him 2 of my innings. So I was doing 4, Howie Rose was doing 5. I said, just give him 2 of mine. I said, if you're a Mets fan, you want to listen to him do the games. Well, he had that call, the Endy Chavez catch. So, and that was my inning. So the next day I get a call from the owner of the Mets. Tom, you made one of the more iconic calls in Mets history. This is going to go down as the greatest catch in the postseason, even though we lost the game. And I was like, I got to call him back and tell him that wasn't me. But that would have been, it was an incredible catch, and he made an incredible call. It was appropriate, though, that he made that call, because he was right on it. And, for this generation, he's the voice of the Mets, so it was important for him to call that. I would have liked to have called it, though. I won't get me wrong, I walked away thinking, damn, that was my inning. And I was doing color commentary. I just sat down like this, I stood up.
What is the favorite call that you've made? And is that a sports metric for you as a broadcaster? What's the one thing that you want to call?
Well, I want to call Super Bowl if I can. That would be the greatest thing, I think, to call. It sounds funny, but I've called 2 World Series. I'd love to call I'd love to call a Super Bowl. I'd love to call a Final Four if I could as well. I love doing college basketball. My favorite call, I have two of them now, is Roy Halladay threw a perfect game several years ago in Miami. I mean, there was only 21 perfect games in the history of the game. So that was pretty sweet to call that one. And then this year, Cole Hamels threw a no-hitter in Chicago, and I called that one. And the reason I loved doing it and I thought it was pretty cool to do is because the way the final out was made, we had a guy in center field who turned out to be one of the best defensive center fielders in the game this year. His defensive rating was 4th among National League center fielders. Well, there's a fly ball to center, and he had no idea where it was, and I didn't think he was going to catch it. So the way he made the catch made it an exciting, I mean, it was a no-hitter anyway, but it made it an exciting call. I laugh now when I listen to it because you can hear it in my voice that I didn't know if he was going to catch it or not. I thought it was going to either go over his head or land 20 feet in front of him because the wind was blowing so much at Wrigley Field. It was, those calls, even though I was on TV, they became kind of radio calls because there's something about the importance of those games that you have to make sure you hit everything. So I almost became a radio broadcaster when I was making those calls. But those are two of my favorite calls.
You try to keep quiet about the no McCarthy?
No, I said it, here's, and for all of you that eventually broadcast, you can't keep quiet about it. That's one thing that I've been taught forever. I mean, there's broadcasters now that keep quiet about it, and I think it's wrong. Because you're doing a game. I mean, you're doing a disservice if you don't say it. So my pattern is if there's a no-hitter after 5, that's when I mention it. Generally if it's 4, there's guys that don't allow a hit through 4. It's not a huge deal. But if there's a no-hitter or a perfect game through 5, that's when I start mentioning it. And I get it out of the way. I mention it, and then I mention it as much as I can when it's appropriate, just because I feel like you have to do it. So, but there are guys now that they don't say it, which I think is strange. If I'm listening on the radio, and I don't know that there's no hitter going on, well, there's a good chance I'll turn it off and walk away. You know what I mean? If I'm out of place, if I'm in a car and I know there's no hitter going on and it's my team, I'm staying. I'm not going wherever I'm supposed to go. So I think it's a disservice sometimes when they don't do it.